argue that that's the buyer, really, because without a deal, right? You don't have the seller doesn't have a deal, so semantics, whatever goes back and forth. But what I want to tell you, and I know that a lot of people are here just for practical purposes and might want to know tools. I don't need to know the whole understanding of the agreement and why it's there. So I'll try not to get dug out into that too much. But I want to keep it simple. I'm a mere seller. He came to me, and he's representing me. Tina is Mike's buyer, right? Or Tina's Mike's buyer's agent. So the buyer's here traditionally via a listing agreement. I'm the seller at closing. And I know you guys don't think of this way, right? Because you just get a closing statement with your check from your title company. But via a listing agreement, the seller was paying Charles Rutenberg Realty, and they were paying ABC Brokerage. That way, but that's really how it was, because he negotiated a 6% commission, and he gave me, you've heard 3 and he kept 3 or whatever, or X percent of commission. So now we're doing the same thing. I'm just paying Tina direct.
I have Venmo.
See, she knows. What good smart woman wouldn't know how to Venmo and get something in there real quick? I'll coordinate that. But that's all. So Amir's going to talk to you about that in 10B. What are the changes? 10B, don't do 10A on the listing agreement. You'll know what we're talking about. So that's really what it is. I know a lot of agents have had a lot of, mental stress over, oh my God, we're not offering commissions. We're not sharing commissions. I just want to be clear as to what's going on. And a real quick synopsis of that is, I have it right here, the 108-page NAR settlement agreement, that I have to read that, look at the changes, implement our strategic policy, keep you guys safe, keep us getting sued again. So, with all that said, the arguments in the courtrooms, guys, so you'll understand why we need the seller to pay it and take the broker right out of it. The arguments in the courtrooms was, you're using standardized forms that were approved by the Florida Association of Realtors Forms Committee, which was made up of the 20th large brokerages in the state, all got in their room and approved a form that we're all using together, where I go to a seller and the seller agrees to pay the other side. Another brokerage is probably going to be in there, a certain amount of that. That gives the appearance that we could be in conspiracy. We have to take that right off the table. The way we take that off the table is by me paying the buyer's agent, I'm the seller, direct. Okay, that's all that really means. Is that anything you want to add on to that? I know I'm
buyer's broker.
Well, they just find attorneys to fight anything.
What's that?
Find attorneys to fight anything.
Yeah, and I don't want to get, listen, it's not my job to scare you guys about lawsuits. It's not my job. I want you to go out there. We do a lot of transactions, and I think, and we do a lot. She knows, look at her. She does a lot, and I think we had, you can smile with me on this too. I think we had half a dozen nuisance suits last year. Those are where your E&O typically is covered. There's 7,000 transactions and half a dozen nuisance suits. Our percentage is pretty good, guys. That's a pretty good number. But I have about half of those in antitrust on my desk right now, additional ones. So where I'm going with this is, you will have no E&O insurance for antitrust. They don't have it. We don't have it. You won't. If you get charged moving forward, if you get brought down in an antitrust suit, you're probably out of business, unless you have probably 7 figures worth of defense money. So really take it serious when we're trying to keep you safe in this antitrust stuff. Okay, I think I heard something. Will you zoom it up? Hello, Zoom people. All right, so we're just trying to let you guys know where we're going with this and what we're trying to do. We're not, first of all, and I want to make it clear too, I don't know about Michael and Tina. I can speak for Amir on this one. We don't agree with what happened on Halloween of last year. We don't agree with the suit. We don't agree with the verdict. But it's done, and we're just going to play by the rules.
You can't cry over the spilled milk.
Yeah.
You can't cry over the spilled
That
milk.
ship is left, guys. And Amir said it a couple of weeks ago. He says, I was crying about that, which was on about 4 months ago. Now we're playing it. So just letting you know.
So that's pretty much the follow-up. That was
yes, there's some mechanisms. If you really feel that it's that necessary to advertise out there, you can. You can email your target people, or you can put it on your Google business page. What you can't do is put it on anything that has an IDX feed. That's going to be an easy bust for you. All an attorney has to do is go, wow, look at here, Agent Smith over at Charles Rutenberg Realty is offering X% commission, and they have an IDX feed from the MLS. If you do, the MLS is coming after you, number one, they're not happy about it. And number two, the attorneys are. It's like, honestly, it's not just antitrust attorneys. Every attorney out there has been watching the news and listening. Yeah, I love that you know what's going on. PI attorneys might be getting into the game, not might, they are. And the biggest ones you can think about, put those names together, they're in the game right now. Okay, I promise you. You want to come see one, I'll show you. If you don't want to be a part of this. But what they're doing now, and if you want to get angry, make your voice heard to your national representatives. Call the people here at the board. And when I say, this is Marcia, get angry with what's going on over there. The Department of Justice is continuing the investigation. There's something out there called the CFA. Look into that. They seem to be really into our business right now and telling us what we can and can't charge, how we're going to do it. They don't like the idea that they're in the DOJ's here, by the way, the CFA is. So, they're saying stuff like you should never pay anybody to go tour a home. Well, I don't work for free. So you might pay me if you want to see me 3 homes. I don't know how that looks, what my business model with that particular buyer is. They're also saying we don't like that you charge percentages anymore. We just want you to use a flat fee number. And they kind of put a disparaging remark in there that the general public, if you read through the 2 sentences of BS, that the general public is so simple, they could never understand what 2% of 500,000 is or 3% of 750,000. So they just want us to dumb it down for them to 30%. We're not telling you to do that. That's not law. That should enrage you that people are getting involved in our business. We're not up involved in attorneys' business telling them what to charge, on their commissions and different things. So, you know what? Understand, take it to a national level. Start screaming the NAR. Why aren't you fighting back? Screaming at your brokerage isn't going to do any good. We've had enough.
Yeah, we've had a lot of that last week.
So they're coming after our forms as well. That's next. So we're going to stay out in front of it. I don't want to put a change in place that you guys are going to have a temporary change. And we could have continued to do these listing agreements with the broker commission from broker to broker, and where we're going to advertise it, I don't know. You're not putting it on the MLS, you're not putting it on anything with an IDX fee from the MLS. But we could make that go away, and instead of you having an interim change, let's just go make the wholesale change what they want, and that's by not sharing commissions from broker to broker. It doesn't mean you're not going to get paid from the seller. We all know where 95% of the time it comes from. It's coming from the other side. So I think we got it clear. You want to tell them real quick? This is a backtrack. What about because we came into about 900 documents, I think, to be approved. We got a lot of buyers, brokers, agreements, and Rutenberg funds.
So obviously, with the change, we all need to have a buyer brokerage agreement before going to show a property, before going to tour a property. That buyer brokerage agreement could be one of 3 documents that has been provided by the Florida Association of Realtors. We have the pre-property touring agreement, we have the showing agreement, or the exclusive buyer brokerage agreement. I know we've gone over the differences between those forms, and we can touch on those as well again. But I wanted to make it as easy as possible for everyone to get a buyer's broker agreement signed. And then what do you do with it afterwards? So I worked with SkySlope, which comes to you free with your Stellar MLS subscription. And it's a very fluid motion. You log in to SkySlope, they have an app which works great on your phone or iPad. As soon as you go in, there's a purple button at the top that says Start Buyer's Agreement. You click on that, it brings up your 3 options, whether it's a touring agreement, showing agreement, or the exclusive buyer broker agreement. Select the form, fill out the fields, and then send it off for signatures. After they sign it, and you sign it, it goes back into a holding tank. And that holding tank you can access it as well. So when you have the contract and whatnot, then obviously you're gonna upload it to Rutenberg files. But in the meantime, what do you do with that signed form? Keep it in that holding tank. If you're not using SkySlope and you wanna go and do, Form Simplicity or Transaction Desk, then of course, when you have probably gonna wanna upload that to Rutenberg files. So you're gonna have to create a transaction. It just takes more steps. So if you're trying to find, the most fluid motion, the best cadence possible, then I would highly suggest you check out SkySync. All of you have access to it. I've made sure that all of our agents have a profile. If it's your first time logging in, you may just need to go in and set up your profile. But it's a very, very fluid motion.
All three of those forms are in your handouts.
Yes. The pre-touring, the showing agreement, and the exclusive. And so, throughout the week, or the past weeks, I get, the common questions of, which form do I use? People aren't going to want to sign an exclusive agreement, and that may be true. So that's why you have those other options. The pre-touring, and the pre-touring I think is a great form to use if you are just meeting that buyer for the first time. And you don't want to put this 3-page or 2-page long document with a lot of legalese into it. It's spelled out very layman's terms. Here's my fee. I'm not charging you anything for touring, or you don't owe me anything right now. If we do decide to continue working together, I may have you sign another agreement. And then of course I get the question, well, can I just put 0 in there? Because I don't want this person to feel uncomfortable with me charging something. Well, no, you can't just, sorry, yes, you could put 0, but then you're telling them, hey, I'm working through nothing. You're worth something, put something in there. You can always modify it later, but if you're putting 0, and then you plan on changing it later, I mean, that's kind of, I would say that's putting a bad taste in somebody's mouth. It's almost a bait and switch situation.
What he's talking about, this is directly, you'll see my cheat sheets, directly out of the 180-page NAR settlement. You can use trust me to read it and interpret it for you. Go do it yourself. I've read this thing over several times. Right out of it, section B, page 28, page 29, section B, the amount of compensation reflected must be objectively ascertainable and may not be open-ended. So here's the example. Buyer broker compensation shall be whatever the amount the seller is offering to buy. That's not okay. You can't put that in. The only other way you could say 0 in there if you truly are charging 0 to your mother, your brother, your aunt, your uncle, whatever. If you're truly charging 0, put it in there. If you might have taken something, you can't do that.
You can't put 0, and then if the seller is paying commission,
You would have to modify. You'd have to modify.
Well, again, I think that's, and I like the questions because I know we all got to get these sides. I'm going to go back and read it again. The amount of compensation reflected must be objectively ascertainable and not open-ended. Okay, so I don't think that it's okay if you really plan on charging a point or 2 or 3 or whatever that you put 0. I think that's violating the spirit of what it's in place for.
And if you put 0 and the seller's not offering anything, you're working for 0. So I think it's you need to figure out what your value is and what you want to charge a buyer. You need to get comfortable with talking to people. People want to pay you. They want to pay for your professionalism. They don't want to pay for amateur hour. They want to pay for the professional. And so, when it comes down to it, most people, are lazy. And, they want that person to tell them exactly what they need to do. So they're going to pay for that. I mean, you use the example of Uber Eats and DoorDash. People pay almost 40% more just to have their food delivered to them instead of going to pick it up themselves. They're paying for that service and they're happy to pay for it. I mean, you're paying $25, $30 for a cheeseburger and you got it yourself.
I have to get out of my pajamas and nothing.
Really? And hold on one second. I think this gives you guys an opportunity. Listen, the one thing I do know is the entrepreneurial spirit and edge in real estate is probably up there with any industry there is. What you guys can come up with. I think you have an opportunity now as buyer's agents to craft, I would have a good, better, best menu item for them. Seriously. I mean, I've bought and purchased, bought and sold real estate the last a long time, 4 years. A long time. Don't look at me like that, kid. And I probably don't need the level of service that a buyer is buying once every 10 years. So I might just want the good. Hey, bare minimum, you want me to turn some doors for you? Here you go. You want me to whip an offer for you? Then maybe you got a next product and you offer more. That's where you guys just craft your own deal. Then you might have the best. And I love the example we were listening to. It's like, I can tell you, maybe, in your best scenario, you give them the red carpet treatment. I don't know what you charge. Maybe it's enough. Maybe you line up their movers and you pay their lawn service and you pay their storage and you negotiate that. Katie, like Amir said, some people want Uber Eats delivered to the door. I have an 18-year-old who loves Uber Eats delivered to her door. I don't get it. She's got a car and she can drive and all that, but she gets Uber Eats, so she's got her own job. She's paying for it, so she can. So as Amir said, a lot of people are paid for that service. You had a question real quick, and we're going to open this. Hey, just let me give you the format here because there it is. Byron's got it up there. We're going to get Michael going here in a minute. We got Michael and Tina with us. Listen, Michael, I'm just going to say this real quick to you guys, and those for you on Zoom. My whole real estate career, I seem to really be around a lot of attorneys. I wound up doing commercial and with attorneys. I wound up running brokerages with attorneys. I wound up working for the courts during the real estate crash. I was a court-appointed receiver. I've been around a lot of attorneys. I can tell you, nobody knows this contract and the loopholes and the least used, I shouldn't say loopholes, the provisions that it provides you than Michael. He does. He knows this contract very, very well. And he's also getting his head wrapped around some ideas to give you guys insight. So our format here, as you see, is we're going to try and bring you up to speed on everything. We're going to take a break. The whole second half is going to be Michael and Tina giving you their wisdom because you guys have heard us already. We're wearing this thing out. We're trying not to. So, Mr. Rutenberg.
Yes, sir. So with that commission, the percentage, is it okay for us to tell our buyer after they sign this that we're going to try our best to negotiate with the seller to pay me that difference?
I would absolutely even start the conversation with it. If you were my buyer, I would say, listen, we're going to work together. This is what you got. I do a lot of things. And by the way, that brings us to Bernardo's class. You know, I heard somebody go, why is an insurance guy teaching us a class to do work with buyers, brokers, buyers agents? And I said, well, first of all, he's been a top producing agent for since this place started for over 25 years. And he told me this is no big deal to him. He said, I've never worked with a buyer without sitting down and talking to them for at least an hour before I ever met them at a property. He's going to share that with you, what he's been doing for 25 years. Absolutely. I would start the conversation with that, George. I would be like, I'm going to make an offer and I'm going to show you every property you wish. I don't care. I don't need to know what the other side's offering. I'm going to do my best to negotiate my commission that I'm charging here in this agreement in the offer. And if I can't, then you and I are going to have to come back to the drawing board because we're going to do this together. And the reason you're doing that is going to get to another later point called steering. And it's not the steering you were taught in your real estate license class. So absolutely, and maybe as an update since last class, we can negotiate it up and down, by the way. We were initially told, oh no, you put some price in there, you can only go down there. That never made sense. They had a modification, so we've gotten that.
Yeah, they have the modification to the buyer brokerage agreement. It's in, all the avenues now, so you can modify it. As long as the buyer is agreeing to sign that you are accepting more, that's all that matters. As long as they do that.
Open and disclosed, new construction.
And, so new construction, if you're out, you sign a buyer brokerage agreement for 2.5%, 3%. And then they start wanting to look at new construction, and new construction's offering 3% plus 5,000. Just do a modification and put in there. As long as the buyer agrees to it, you're good to go. Tagging along with that same question, George. In the compensation paragraph on the buyer brokerage agreement, it specifically states in there that you will try whatever the seller pays will be credited towards the buyer. And when you're going to negotiate it into the contract, it needs to be at the direction of the buyer. So you might want to add into other terms of the buyer brokerage agreement that buyer wants me to negotiate in the contract. As we all know, for many years, it's been don't negotiate in the contract, but it's got to be very clear that you're doing it at the direction.
Yeah. I just think it's a great opportunity for you to know what you're working for now with buyers. You never knew before, did you? Right? I'm going to work with a brand new buyer. We're going to look at 2 properties or 200 properties. I don't know where it gets into, and I don't know what I was getting paid. Now you know if you invest and pour into this buyer, you know because you have a buyer's agreement that says what you're going to get paid. Now, how you get it and negotiate it might be a combination of both. Maybe you get 2% from the seller and make up 1% from the buyer. Maybe you craft your offer. You're making a run at a $500,000 house, and you're right there. You know what the net is. You've negotiated. Things have been countered back and forth, and maybe you come to the buyer and you say, "Listen, let's offer a little more to cover my." Maybe that offer you came in at 500 and you got it somewhere at 495, and the numbers just aren't working. They need 2% back at closing costs for Michael to get them done in the loan, and maybe you got to come back in at 505.5. we've done this. This is not that hard. You're negotiating. The sellers, all that they're interested in is their net. Do they really care if they're selling it for 500,000 and they net 470? You think they might sell it for 515,000 and net 80 or 480, whatever? The numbers. You understand what I'm saying? The seller only cares about the net, right? So understand that's going to be okay. I think we should probably, because time is going to wait. On this really quick, move on over to the listing agreement.
All right, so with the new listing agreement, a couple of new ones I know we touched on already. Let's talk about your current listings that are under an old listing agreement. You know, there's actually many listings out there that are tied to a listing agreement prior to the recent one that was changed in March. And then there's the new one that came out in March until last week. Either one of those, really, at a very minimum, there's a new form that came out that's called the compensation disclosure statement. It's a very simple one-page disclosure. I would go ahead and give this to every single one of your listings that is on an old listing agreement. The verbiage that they have in there, nothing crazy, just notice to buyer, seller, owner, brokerage compensation is not set by law and is fully negotiable. Put on the bottom of that form the date you gave it to them and how you delivered it. Put it in your file. That's all that you need to do for your previous, or for your previously signed. Now, if the seller wants to modify the compensation, or you guys are, between the two of you are planning to modify the compensation, they did bring out a new modification to the listing agreement. On here, just like the old one, you can extend the termination date or, change price and terms, but then you also have the third and fourth box, which modifies the compensation. So if the seller is all of a sudden now they don't want to offer compensation to a buyer's agent or whatnot, then in that third box, you're going to change the total amount of compensation that you're taking, because that's your fee that you're charging the seller. It's not a bucket anymore that you put, oh, this is the total amount that the seller is paying. No, this is just what you are charging that seller to list, market, sell their homes. And then going to that fourth box, but if you're looking at the modification of listing agreement, the fourth box down under B, that's where it specifically states that the seller is paying this amount to the buyer's agent, and that's being paid by the seller. It's no longer being shared. Does that make sense?
Okay, one more time, what's box 4?
Say that again?
Box 4?
Box 4 on the modification of the listing agreement, that's gonna be for what the buyer's broker is receiving. And then it has A, B, and C stating how that's being paid. Is it being shared? Is it being paid by the broker? Is it being paid by the seller? Or if the seller is not offering compensation. As we've stated many times in the past, we don't share commissions, so it's only going to be B or C.
If we're not allowed to be paying buyers brokers from the broker, why is it still an option?
Well, I didn't write the forms.
I know, but
And the one
why
I'm
would
writing
the
won't have it
business-
in there.
Why would they do
Just
that?
adding to the confusion.
For the realtors,
We're not allowed to do it anymore.
well, so
Why?
This brings up a good point.
that's a great point.
Trying to catch
And
up.
I've been
Yeah,
trying to.
trying to snag, yeah.
You should be done with. So they had to write, this is a settlement agreement that will be tested by the lawyers and the language and the spirit of it and what's okay and what's not okay. You've got 50 different state associations try to take this language and incorporate it into their 475, because we have a 475 and every other state has a whatever for the statutes. And at that time, the Florida Realtors put that out, they felt that it should still be in there. Where again, I want to be very clear. We are seeing what's coming down the road. That's why we have taken a stance. Us, some major brokerages have already done this after us, by the way. I'm not saying they listen to us. Some major nationwide brokerages have come behind us and said, hey, we're not sharing commissions either. That just means we're going to have the seller pay the buyer's agent direct. That's all that means. So it's still on there. I suspect it won't be. I also suspect the concessions are going to come out of the MLS too. My words are coming out. Got a question all the way in the back. You got to speak loud.
My question is, if we have a pre-existing listing agreement with a homeowner, okay? That means now, because we have language before, now we have to change the language and change the form before we can list the property again?
So,
Are you saying that it's still currently active?
Yes,
Okay, so then I would do the modification to the listing agreement, and if they wanna keep the numbers the same, just change it so that the seller is paying that amount to the buyer's agent directly.
you got 6% and 3 and 3, or 5 and 2.5, 2.5, or 2 and 3, whatever you got. Make sure that's in box 4B
4B.
on the modification. That's where you got to reflect that.
So your previous listing agreement in paragraph 8, that would have been the total amount that the seller would be paying in commission. Well, today, the listing agreement has changed, how we're gonna be doing things since we're not sharing commission. And in paragraph 8, you're just gonna put what your fee is. So if you typically would have only taken half of that 6% or 5%, you're gonna put the 3% in paragraph 8. And then in paragraph 10B, or on this modification, box 4B, you're gonna put whatever they're offering to a buyer's broker and stating that they are paying the buyer's broker directly.
so in other words, we have to go back to the previous listing agreement, the active, the property listing agreements we have currently in force and working with, we've got to go back and change.
We need to modify to bring in the new language as well as how we're splitting up. the
So we're on right here. So on the, just because I can see people kind of like flipping through their pages. So Amir's talking right now, he was talking about the exclusive right?
Yep.
10, right here is where he was,
10B.
10B. And then on the modification, you go to that one, Byron. We are looking at, I can't reach all the way over here. Up there, yeah. Box 4.
4B.
So Michael,
Well, I was just to answer the question, why do we have the option of the 10A? Sorry, yeah, 10A. It's because the settlement agreement didn't specifically bar it at this point. But I think the answer is that we all see through the pipeline that the big cause of the problem is the cooperation between brokerages. And so, as the lawyers are gonna say, if you can have a seller pay a buyer directly, it eliminates all the possibility of the brokers being involved in how the commission is actually being paid. So while it's not specifically barred yet, we don't know how some brokers are gonna handle this. So unfortunately, because it's not uniform, a lot of what we're gonna be discussing here today is the fact that this way that Mike for Rutenberg is and other brokerages are handling it is probably the best route and gonna be the most adopted common route of how commissions are gonna be handled. But it may not be exclusively right away how it's gonna be handled. So you're gonna see brokers that are still potentially hoarding that money and still doing the 9A and the 10C option potentially.
absolutely. And think about something else too. If you were to keep doing that, you're probably not gonna get paid at closing on that. You're gonna treat that as referrals. The title's gonna have to send the whole check to the office. We're gonna have to pay another broker. That's what you're gonna have to do. It's gonna slow your checkups, create a lot more paperwork, and jam the system up. So we just don't see that as a good option. And as Michael just explained to you, take yourself out of the argument of a conspiracy to collude to commit antitrust abuse, right? Take yourself out. I'm not paying ABC brokers. I'm only paying the agent. I'm only receiving income from the agent. Sure. Oh, there's a lot.
I had my clients, my listings, sign the addendum to the exclusive right prior to August 6th. Do I have to have them sign this as another change? I could just leave it that way. And then also that addendum did not have a 10B with a seller to broker compensation. It just said either, what you pay Rutenberg
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
nothing.
You're okay though. Yeah.
And I just told them they can negotiate. So
Yes.
just leave it that way.
Yes. Yeah.
We're
And
gonna be in this kind of
flux. Yeah.
gray area for a little while,
Until we get the pendings through, the pending before the change. By the way, just so you understand clear too, digressing to buyer side again too. If you're pending prior to the 17th and it's closing after the 17th and you're representing the buyer, you need to have a buyer's agreement in that file. It's not hard, okay? But prior to closing, go get them to sign the touring agreement or something. But you have to have something in the file.
Right. And, it should be pretty clear that the seller's already paying the commission. And obviously it specifically states in there, whatever the seller's paying you will be credited towards that amount. So you just put in that same amount in the buyer brokerage agreement and it washes.
Just say that you're my seller, right? And I want to make sure that as my broker, you're okay with this conversation. we're gonna list the home for about 500,000. That's what we talked about. You may end up getting offers that are less than that. We might have to negotiate down. We've talked about that as well. There might be something in there to where you have to pay the buyer's agent. I mean, is that a conversation? And I mean, I would do better than that, but just talk to the seller right up front and say, listen, we're gonna get an offer. There's gonna be all types of terms in there. Some of them you might like, some of you may not. One of them might be that you're gonna have to pay the seller's agent because we don't share commissions.
Absolutely. I think it's very important to have that conversation up front when you're having, when you're doing your listing presentation and getting them to sign a listing agreement. Prepare them for what's going on in the market. And, let them know that, hey, there's, the biggest change in the market right now is they want commissions to be separate. So, your buyers that are gonna come through, they're likely to have a buyer's agent, and they have an agreement between the two of them that the buyer is gonna pay their agent directly. However, the truth is, buyers really don't have the money to pay their agent. So they're gonna still come back to us. So where my fee to you, Mr. Seller, is 3% to list and sell your home, I highly recommend that we budget 2.5% to 3% or whatever it's gonna be. So when we receive these offers, we can, go through them and make objective decisions. I would also get comfortable with doing net sheets. I think,
Yes.
giving them the option to do that. And if you're not doing net sheets or you don't know where to find a net sheet, Tina over at Integrity, they have a phenomenal website that you create your account. You can, create any type of net sheet, buyer sheet, seller sheet.
Yep. You can scan the QR code back on our banner back there.
Back here.
Byron, don't fall.
Not gonna fall this time.
Follow-up question.
This one right here.
Yeah.
I'm still talking to you as a seller.
Okay.
The way that I've always done it myself is that if there's another agent involved, I charge this much. If I'm the only agent involved, I charge this much.
Yeah.
And can I still do that if I've already told you, if I already put 2.5% in the listing agreement and I'm the only agent, it might mean that I'm representing the buyer for nothing. I mean, how would you handle that?
I think you're gonna do the same thing you used to do, put it in other terms. And Michael
Michael's
has
gonna
a
talk about that.
great
Okay.
section.
So I would suggest adding on it, so what I foresee, and remember I work with a lot of brokers and I work with a lot of agents, so not everything is gonna work exactly the same way. I suspect online on provision 8A, you're gonna say, here's what I'm charging you. You're gonna go to the seller and you say, listen, seller, my suggested fee for this is gonna be 6%. And I'm gonna suggest it that I'm gonna charge you 3% and we're gonna offer compensation for 3% to the buyer's agent. I'm gonna suggest that you offer that. So always start out what the highest number is and then explain to them how we're gonna get to that. I'm gonna charge you 6 and I'm gonna do it as follows. It's gonna be 3%. I'm gonna suggest that you get charged 6. I'll charge you 3%. We're gonna offer compensation to the buyer's agent for 3%. What do you think? You're gonna pay that at closing. So you're gonna fill out 8A, 3%. You're gonna fill out line 149, 150, 3%. Seller authorized broker to offer compensation. Am I correct on that, gentlemen?
Absolutely.
Okay, so that covers now, you're gonna be paying seller, you're gonna be paying me the 3%, which I just said. You're gonna be paying the buyer's agent 3%. That's that 6% we just talked about, okay? Sounds good, Mike. Listen, if I find the buyer or the buyer's not represented, I'm willing to do it for a reduced rate. Where do I add that in? Under additional terms, if listing agent procures buyer or buyer is unrepresented, listing agent's total commission shall be. And then that one little simple one sentence, now you're not tinkering with a lot of things, but if I do both sides, it's gonna be X amount, okay? And then that way you've got it covered for both scenarios, that if you're gonna offer, but if you're doing both sides, buyer's not represented, then you're gonna have a higher fee on the listing.
On it.
I would take that language verbatim.
Can you repeat that, Michael? Can you repeat that?
Go slow, Mike.
If listing agent procures buyer or buyer is unrepresented. If listing agent procures buyer or buyer is unrepresented, then listing agent total commission to be
Whatever.
5% plus 295, whatever that
Forget that.
may be. If listing agent procures buyer or buyer is unrepresented, then listing agent's total commission to be blank. Now, I suspect, just like I typed up language that I gave to Mike Webb and Amir a couple of weeks ago, on other things, and I may change my tune this evening when I'm looking at it again, you know, sitting on my deck. But that's where I'm at right now. So don't think that my word is gospel at this point, because I suspect that these things are gonna change, and how we do things are gonna change, and what issues we see start to develop is gonna change.
And we're gonna be back here next month. So we're gonna be back here once a month, from now through the end of the year, and we'll probably even roll it over into the beginning of the year because of all the changes.
Yeah, we're thinking about putting some in GTAR too.
Right,
Yeah.
yes.
So that covers you, it's real simple. I got what I'm gonna charge you if I do both sides, or, you know, when I'm representing the buyer, or if I'm not representing the buyer's unrepresented, and I'm charging you a different fee. And obviously you could elaborate on that, you know, I've seen obviously where they've done variations where things like if it's another agent in the same office, obviously that's not really a Rutenberg kind of model, but other brokerages might do variations like that. Questions?
You said, the percentage plus the 295. I thought we were getting rid of the fee, the MLS fee.
Well, that would be what the seller's being paid, or the seller's paying us, would be the 295. Moving forward, that MLS fee, or what people call the MLS fee, is not going to.
It's actually gone now, isn't it?
It's gone now.
Yeah, it's gone
because
now.
You're not putting it in the MLS, so how can you justify taking it away from the buyer side commission when the seller's paying?
So that would be, if you're going to do something like that, if you're gonna charge a $295 or whatever to your seller, that's going to now be a transaction fee. MLS is gone. So if you charge a transaction fee, I don't know.
Can I elaborate too on some
Yeah.
other
Please.
things? So one thing we had when we had this class last month is we didn't talk about, and I think it's really important, and correct me, gentlemen, if you don't think I'm going on the right track here, is I think it's really important for you guys as the agents, when you're representing a buyer or representing a seller, to digest a counteroffer and simply don't start forwarding things like we were used to doing, because so much is going to dice up potentially your commission. If you start forwarding things right on, oh, I got this counteroffer from the buyer, I got this counteroffer from the seller, and forward it right on, you might be shooting yourself in the foot, okay? So you very much are gonna have to be prepared to review things before they do, and particularly if it's gonna affect your commission, and say, okay, so I was offering my property for $500,000, and a buyer offers $475 and 2% commission. So really my effective net price isn't $475, it's in the whatever 2% equates to, but it's lower than that. And so you're gonna need to talk to your seller and say, hey, the effective price is X. Like, let's just say you're negotiating that commission. You're gonna have to start reviewing these things before you forward them on, because you're gonna have to have that conversation maybe with the seller and say, what do you think of the $450? Go to bat for your fellow agent, you know, because he's gonna see $475. He's not gonna pay attention that it's also 2% off to the buyer's broker. So you're gonna have to tell him the counter offer is, the net result of the counter offer is $450. How do you wanna do it? Because if you counter offer that, if you say it's $475, he's just gonna say, yeah, take it, but nix off the 2%. Well, you just shot your fellow agent in the foot. So you're gonna have to start, what do you think of the $450? And then start talking to them before you start forwarding things on. And then if you're the buyer's agent, you're gonna have to say, I can get this deal done for you, but it's gonna be this. And then show them how you got to the map. So that way you get them set. At least when we did short sales all the time, we got, as a law firm, we got nixed all the time on our fees.
Yeah.
And so I had to constantly call to the other side and say, hey, look, I can get this deal done for you, but it's gonna be this number. Like, that just meant I had to digest the numbers briefly and show them how I was gonna still get paid on this deal. So I think that's really important. Gentlemen, do you have anything to?
Michael Cochran, sir?
I wanted to state, some of you, I gave out a seller concession sheet, and that's just very, to your point, I just want to bring this up. When you're reviewing the contracts and you're talking about numbers, for example, if you separate the commission in a different line item, it's viewed separately, that chart says. However, if they reduce, like if you don't separate it and you want to offset it with a commission, with a credit, so if you don't say commission separate, you're just trying to offset your commission by seller credit, they counter, let's say you said 5% and they countered at 2% and you forward it, like it is what it is. So on the other way, being really knowledgeable and knowing what you can do for each loan product is going to matter too. Because some of the loan products only allow you to go to 2%, Some go to 4%, some go to 6%. So if you miss that and don't review it, accuracy is really gonna count, to Michael's point.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, last time we talked about this, your seller concession to a buyer for closing costs, needs to be separately spelled out from your seller's payment commission to the buyer's
Hold
broker.
on, that's not true. That's not true. That they can be lumped together.
But
All
they could
suggest-
lose it.
They could lose it. We
They could
suggest
lose
that they
it,
don't,
yes.
but they could lump it together. so
But
that
you can
couldn't
lose it based on the
Yeah.
loan program that your buyer is getting. So,
If you separate it, you're protecting.
Protecting
the
everybody,
board.
so I
But if
was
you
just
lump it
saying,
together, you just gotta be cautious on what other factors could happen.
exactly.
and keep in mind, loan programs change right in the middle of the processing. I mean, and a buyer might be going conventional and then all of a sudden, that's not gonna work, and they go FHA, and if you've got it all lumped together, that could really kind of mess up your buyers.
So that would be, so I say that to make sure you realize that you may get presented with both situations.
Yes.
The ideal agent is gonna separate the two and say seller credit the buyer for closing costs, seller to pay buyer's broker Y, and separate the two. But you also might be presented with both those options. And I think it's important to understand that if you're representing the buyer, first off, separating, as Michael's gonna tell you all day long, is gonna keep you from avoiding the possibility that you could lose money and leave money on the table. Always talk to your buyer's mortgage broker anyway. But at the same token too, if you're now on the selling side and your seller is saying, I want a counter offer, but I want to remove X and Y out of the whole deal. Before you present that counter offer, you're gonna have to probably pick up the phone and say, this is what my seller is gonna do. Is that gonna cause you any issues with your buyer's lender? There's gonna be a lot more communication that's gonna have to happen between the two brokers
Yes.
to stick up for your commissions. So that way you don't shoot yourselves in the foot and accidentally shoot your buyer in the foot for a credit that they can't give. But you might see both those options, which stinks, but you should be prepared that that could happen.
And exactly what you said, as far as you guys working out there in the field, I believe your reputation is going to be compounded now. More so than it ever has in the business, because there's not just a blanket offer of compensation. So other agents are, gonna want you to pick up the phone and go, yeah, I did a deal with Michael. He was communicative. We worked together. We got along. Because when offers come in, you got 3 offers on a property. And you're talking to a seller and agent from XYZ brokerage over here that you didn't communicate with and how's tough. You think that's gonna get conveyed in an offer that might want 3% from your seller? I think it's really important that you more so than ever, communicate with the other side. Work the business. You really need to go hone your negotiation skills. I don't have any books or places to send you right now, but I would take a negotiation course immediately so you understand what's going on. I know we have a bunch of questions in here.
I got one for you. So scenario, I have a listing, buyer's agent shows it Thursday, sends me an offer Saturday morning. We're negotiating all weekend. Let's call it probably $1,500 apart as of this morning. And I get a compensation, seller's broker to pay buyer's broker more percent than what it was, listed when I originally told them, hey, this pays 2.5%. So hour and a half ago, we're pretty much close to part of the deal, but they send me a separate form. It's not part of the offer or anything, but it's basically says Rutenberg will pay Keller Williams 2.75%, not 2.5 or whatever. How does that kind of play into it? Because that was never, we pretty much have the deal.
Jump the quickest.
The deal, I was gonna bring the question, but then it started getting relevant.
No problem with that deal, wrong form.
So we want it to be on the compensation agreement, seller to buyer's broker form. So that way it's specifically stating that the seller is paying it to the buyer's broker. Otherwise, it says that we're sharing commissions.
Okay, and the other part is the deal's kind of pretty much already been kind of ironed out, and now they're asking for more than what it was.
Well,
So that's
you
gonna
understand-
throw the net off of the seller.
Just so you guys know, we don't, you can get a seller to buyer's broker or, buyer's to seller's broker. It's fine, but you can't enter into an agreement, on our behalf without our signature. They just don't have that authority. So just understand that that's not gonna get signed in our house. Treat the seller to buyer's broker.
I think it's your question
Yeah,
though,
his
can
question
they do that?
Yeah, they're asking
they're
for
asking
They
money.
could
for more.
They could certainly, I think, ask, but they can't, I think the buyer themselves are limited, they can't. The broker themselves
Well,
can't get paid.
I mean, yeah, they can't ask for more than they have a buyer's agreement for. So at that point, I would say, well, send me over your buyer's agreement. They might doctor it up real quick, right? My own base here.
Yeah.
And I know this is all new, guys. We're dealing with new forms and new ways to do it, but if we really look at it from, not 10,000 feet, not 200 feet, it's not that complicated. It's not. It's just different and new.
Now, here's the situation that very well could happen. I mean, we've all negotiated all these kinds of scenarios, is then you can send back the counter offer at the price acceptable with a seller to buyer broker at 2.5%. And now all of a sudden you just spin the whole thing between the buyer and the buyer's broker and say, we now have accepted your offer if it's contingent upon your buyer or broker being satisfied with his compensation, and make them sort that out between themselves. But we're only paying 2.5%. And that right there is the pinning that I hope doesn't happen between buyers and buyers brokers. But at some point, as a seller, you're like, I never said I was anything. We never said we were gonna pay anything more than 2.5. Now that's up to you, between you and your.
Yeah, after the deal's kind of been negotiated in principle, it's like the 11th
Yeah,
hour.
it's just kind of shady that they sliced that into you at the 11th hour. I agree 100%. But then that's the squeeze that I'm hoping agents don't do to each other, is that they start sending things back and say, no problem, I'll take your buyer's offer for X, but that results in you getting 0 commission. You agents are gonna have to kind of look out for each other and say, no, that really isn't an acceptance of my offer because you removed all my compensation. That's really, let's put it back at a reasonable number and give me a true counter offer that's higher money, then I still get paid. So that's the communication you're gonna have to have as agents with your respective parties. And when you get that kind of shady counter offer where it says, I'll take everything but pay you 0, you're gonna have to regurgitate that to your other side and say, well, really the number is 510, not 500, because you still owe me 10,000 in commission. So let's make it back to the 510, and then I get paid.
Do you have, Bernardo?
It was just a question about the compensation agreement. If by adding, let's say, 2.5% of the value of the contract as buyer's agent compensation versus having the compensation agreement on a separate form, when it comes to enforcement of getting that money, does that make a difference? Does that become broker versus seller versus something that would hold up the transaction from closing?
So in that case, when you have that commission form, you should have a separate agreement. So you're offering 2.5% to the buyer's broker. You communicated that to the buyer's broker, but you should still have a separate seller to buyer broker agreement, where now the seller has you've offered the compensation at 2.5. That's what the listing.
That would be
agreement
10B, right?
Yeah.
You're gonna reference that. So what he's saying is have it in the listing agreement and the form.
And the form.
I was actually asking from a buyer's standpoint, from a buyer's agent standpoint. If we're putting an offer on a property and we have a buyer's agent compensation with the seller of the property, versus having that commission listed on the additional terms of the contract.
Either one's fine, but I think that anybody would tell you an actual buyer broker agreement, an actual seller to buyer broker agreement, the one that we have here, is better than putting it under additional terms, because it specifically says, like, if you don't pay it, I get legal fees and stuff like that. You can add it under additional terms, though.
This would be a good point for you to talk about line 140, 154. If you do have that agreement in the contract where you put it back.
That was the reason for the question.
In the contract.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But so
We're gonna,
come back.
yes, I'm thinking we do a little break.
Yeah, we'll do a little break,
10
guys.
minutes?
10-minute break. I do want to say this. I was going to wait till the end of the day, but to the end of the class, but I want to do this. And to all the Zoom people, we have opened this up to non-Rutenberg agents. I don't know if there's any non-Rutenberg agents in here. If you are, you're welcome. A lot of brokerages are not. A lot of agents aren't getting the support they feel they need. So we've opened it up to a lot of people. We're trying to help. I would suggest to you, I've seen some stuff from social already out there. You're really giving them good information. You're saying, hey, this is how we did it. We were in the class and whatnot. I think you should really try to help somebody along if you can. I think that's important. It's just doing good out there. I'm going to tell you this. I never do this. The first time I've ever done it. I don't care where agent you come from, how long you've been with another brokerage or anything. You have lenders and you have insurance people and you have title companies. We never force anything down here. I take recruiting calls every day. No, you can use your own title company. I would suggest to you guys, give these people that are pouring everything out to you a shot at your business. Throw them a deal. These guys are here and these gals are here, really have their head wrapped around it. You don't want to get to a title company at closing that doesn't understand anything that we just talked about and wrecks your deal and starts maybe everything getting thrown back up in your face. What about Michael? I've already seen some lenders that don't understand what's going on out there. Your business is just as complicated as ours, if not more so sometimes. And then you got Bernardo in the back. I don't get paid, this is a non-attorney solicitation, whatever they call it, but I would suggest they're pouring into it, give them a shot at your business. We'll take
Before we take a break, real quick, I just want to touch base so we can wrap up the listing agreement side of things. Concessions. So I know there's a little bit of confusion out there about what a concession is. What it is not a replacement for commissions. So they have, obviously, everybody knows they removed compensation from the MLS. Now they've added in a concession field. Concession field is completely optional. Doesn't have to be put in there at all. Could be, I think it's a yes or no checkbox. If the seller wants to offer concessions, then that's gonna go into, on the listing agreement on line 38, where it says seller expenses. That's where you're gonna put in whatever concession the seller would preemptively wanna offer a buyer. And then, of course, when you go into the MLS, if you check the box yes, it's gonna put the first line of the public remarks that the seller is open to concession. And of course, the optional fields there are what it's for and how much it is. You can put the dollar amount, you don't have to put the dollar into the MLS. But I know there's been a little bit confusion about, oh, I'm just, whatever the seller was offering for a buyer's agent, I'm just gonna put that in the concession. No, don't do that. That is not what that field is intended for, and that will get you in trouble with the MLS.
Absolutely. And one last caveat to that as you try to get us out of here.
That's all right.
I could do a quick break.
I know, you boys
So-
never pay attention.
You can still advertise your seller's willingness to pay a buyer's broker compensation on the MLS. Just put it in the remarks. Just say, and don't say willing to pay a commission. Just say seller is open to any and all requests. Put it in the offer. If you see that, is that going to suggest to you that they may be willing to pay me a commission? So just do it that way. That way you still get it out there, but that's okay. You can put that in the remarks, in the comments on your.
Public remarks or
You can
realtor
put it in
remarks?
both.
Okay.
And just say, seller is willing to consider any and all requests. Put it in the offer.
Okay.
That's the sentence. There you go. All right, let's take a break so you guys. All right.
All right,
They
guys,
have to.
we're gonna get started here. We didn't get to truly introduce everybody, because I was messing with the PC that decided to update. If everybody has a PC, they know once you hit Windows update at 2%, it takes 72 years for it to actually hit 100. But my name is Byron, I'm the relationship director. We set all this up once a month, like Tina said. We're trying to make sure everybody's educated and ready to go, because on August 17th, you're gonna have a lot of things to worry about. I wanna thank a few people other than like Integrity Title. We're also sponsoring this for the day. With our Charles Rutenberg family, Marvel Insurance, Bernardo Piccolo, he brought your snacks back there. Michael Cochran up here from CMG Mortgage, he's here for your help. Obviously, you've already gotten a flyer from him. And the gentleman that's been walking around taking pictures. He's a very good real estate photographer, drones, Matterport, everything. He was kind enough to come help us today. He's also sponsoring this today to help do some pictures just for today's class. But very lively with very lively images. He is a Pinellas County realtor affiliate, so if you go onto Pro's website, you can grab his info. You'll also receive an email from probably him or myself thanking you for being here with his info. Okay, CMG and everybody else pretty much you probably have, but Michael Webb, because I've had people on the Zoom that are asking questions because some of them still haven't met their brokers, Amir and Michael Webb. So Michael Webb, Amir, Tina Kendall, operations manager, and Michael Heath, our attorney. But I want to make sure that everybody on Zoom knows who everybody is. Number two, main thing, the microphone is so sensitive that it picks up every single pieces of paper that gets flipped over. So a lot of people on Zoom are having a little trouble. So I'm asking them to speak up, and if everybody can try and sort as quietly as possible. It's the best we can do right now with the way the microphone is. But thank you for everything. Oh yeah, silence your phones if you can. All right, but let's get back to it.
All right, thank you. I know we're gonna slide on to the other side where Michael's gonna talk to you about the contract and different things we can do there. This lady right here had two really good questions for me at the break that needed to be referenced in the crowd. Would you please repeat those? The first one.
I can remember. Yes, so since Charles Rutenberg is not doing or splitting compensation, if we are in a transaction with somebody else who is still using the listing agreement where the broker is able to split their compensation and they are offering us Charles Rutenberg part of that, we should, if they are not willing to sell or sign the seller to buyer's broker form of compensation, and they insist because of their listing agreement that the broker is paying Charles Rutenberg, or willing to split it with us.
How do we handle it?
Yes, thank you.
Well, I would say, do your best to negotiate on the offer. So if it's in the contract that the seller's gonna pay it, you're covered. If they just want to use that compensation agreement, seller's broker and buyer's broker, I think us as a brokerage are probably gonna have to be flexible, moving forward with that, because we obviously can't control what another brokerage is going to do. I think it's gonna depend on how title companies will handle that too. Moving forward, are you gonna continue doing it the same way, or will you collect it all from, let's say, Remax, and then Remax has to class?
We would take a disbursement, so you're gonna have to see if there's any buyer brokers agreement. We would take a commission form. We have our own forms at a title company that address that the listing agent would have to confirm to us what our commission's gonna be. And then typically, we also have a buyer's broker agent fill out a form also confirming, and then we make sure they all match and make sure that they're there correctly. But we would accept instructions to pay the buyer's broker, like Charles Rutenberg, that fee. And we would accept instructions to split the commission from Charles Rutenberg into the agent's share and the broker's share.
So you would handle it at closing. You could get a check, a disbursement at closing. The agent. So I think what she's asking is, we have a current pending transaction and she's got the buyer, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I think, and we've had this already come across, and I think she knows that we don't like to commission share. We're not. We could control that on the listing side. In this transition period right now, I believe that if another brokerage wants to send that form to you and you send it to us, we're gonna have to accept it for now. We're hoping to get out of it, correct? You're gonna send it up. And guys, anything you send over to us, send it over on broker signature on the dashboard, please. If you jam up my inbox, it doesn't happen quickly. And I'm gonna sign for you. Plus, that's how we track things down, so.
Yeah, I mean, I think what Rutenberg is trying to control is the idea that they would be sharing commissions from the seller with the buyer's broker. On the flip side, if you're getting commission from the seller's broker, that's gonna be fine, because that's no different than what it is now.
Right, because there are brokerages that are using the new listing agreement and
They still share commissions.
they're still sharing, and Florida Association of Realtors has backed that's why that is on that form, and I understand we're not supposed to be doing that. My question was more, if we do run into somebody that is doing that, can we use the seller's broker to buyer's broker?
Yeah, on the buy
Commission
side, if you
and-
have a situation, we're gonna be flexible with that.
Okay.
This goes back to what I first started, that I don't wanna make an interim change with you guys. Maybe in a year from now, we can come back and go, yeah, you called that one right, because it's gonna go away. It is. It just is, it lends itself to the impropriety that we're all colluding together. Florida Realtors and other brokerages, some of the, I don't like announcing or discussing any of the other brokerages, the competition out there, if you will. But the major ones are starting to come around I think real quick. You're gonna have a lot of smaller ones that just aren't informed enough to know.
And I think really important is you're gonna have to make sure also that you send us the integrity title, your title companies, send those agreements to us with the contract. If it's not specifically in the contract, we're gonna need to see those. We need to figure out who's paying what. We don't wanna get down to, right before closing and somebody's looking at a settlement statement where this is being charged to the seller. Well, wait, no, the buyer's paying that, or vice versa, because then, especially when there's a loan involved, then we gotta go back, and we gotta make some changes and, delays in closing. So all these forms, title's gonna need more than the contract. We're gonna probably ask you, fill out our commission form, and you're gonna say, well, I already sent you this. No, just fill it out. It's better that way. That way, we have this form, and then you filled out our company form, they match.
We wanna make sure that we don't get to a closing table and there still be some disagreement as to how much commission.
Right, that's my concern, is
And-
just
and-
how to protect yourself.
It happens.
Right.
We do get.
I know.
We do get
Right.
forms, and then next thing you know, we say, okay, now we need to stop for a second, and we'd like to do that like a couple of days before closing, not like at the table.
I'd rather do it.
So send those forms and send all.
But that's why we do those forms, is
Yes.
to avoid it at the 11th hour.
You gotta share it a little louder. please,
Louder.
So they can hear you.
On our website, Byron?
On the integrity title forms that they send about all the things, are those PDF editable yet?
No, but you can't fill them out on, you can fill them out on the integrity website. There's not a PDF fillable, but there is a form that you can fill out online that you can send to us and it directly goes to us.
I do know that, but sometimes like if it's not Tina, maybe it's somebody in the office and they're sending me those forms and, having, would be really
Right.
helpful. Please and thank you.
Or you can just fill it out online.
Yeah.
Byron's gonna look into it.
Byron's gonna look into that.
He's gonna look.
Yep.
Please.
So the follow-up to your
The
question.
follow-up question was, I'm seeing a lot of the, email blasts through like Property Blast that I believe is affiliated with. And Amir, I know I discussed this with you the other day. So I just want to clarify, so if they are sending email blasts that say, seller is willing to compensate buyer's broker for, 3% or what have you, that is still technically not supposed to be allowed.
If it's coming from the MLS or it's got any tie back to the MLS, it should not be happening.
Okay.
But if you go with, I don't know, maybe Michael has a company that they use that they can do an email blast for you that doesn't tie that back to the MLS,
Right.
then that should be fine.
Okay.
But it's probably only a matter of time before those kind of other third-party vendors would get sued the same way,
Right.
I'm gonna share some more right out of the,
Look at you.
out of the settlement agreement. This is the 108-page settlement agreement. So you guys all understand steering. We talked about it from taking your class. It's, you can't steer any class of people to, one area or another in any way. It's wrong. We know that. So the DOJ and the settlement and plaintiff's attorneys are using steering as well, but in a different light. You're using it to us as to steering buyers to the highest commission. It's been all over the settlement paper. It's been all over the current investigation that's going on. They're calling it steering, and it is a big no-no. It is antitrust behavior. So page 28, I believe, right out of the agreement. Here it is. Page 28, paragraph 58, section 5. Agree not to create, facilitate, or support any non-MLS mechanism, including providing listing information to internet aggregators. That basically means I got an internet site, I'm gonna aggregate all this information. Agree not to create, facilitate, or support any non-MLS mechanism, website, internet, for listing brokers or sellers to make offers of compensation to buyers and brokers. It's really that simple. They don't want you, the agent, to be able to steer your buyer into a property because you saw somewhere the highest commission is here. It's not a smart idea, guys. You just don't need to do it. That's why we just said, hold on one second, Carl. That's why we just said, just put it in the list, in your remarks, that the seller is open. Now, if you have a Google business page or something, you want to do that, that's fine. But if you have a page that has an IDX feed and you offer compensation on that, you just committed antitrust behavior. Okay, so I'm trying my best to share the information with you. It's exactly as it comes. It's a no-no. It really is.
So the agents can, however, say seller is open to accepting a 3% credit to buyers for concessions. That is acceptable.
Seller is open to a 3% for buyer's concession. Yeah, but that's not going on the MLS.
Okay, you can't offer a closing cost credit on the MLS?
Well, so I think that's gonna be a stellar MLS question specifically, but to be able to put that verbiage in. But when you're talking about a seller credit, seller concession, yes, that can go into the MLS. There's an actual field now. Whether they want to see that in the public remarks, I don't know. That's gonna be a question for Stellar. But to blanket offer, the seller wants to advertise that they're offering a concession and that buyer can use that concession for whatever they want to use it for, that definitely can go in the MLS. Just the verbiage per se in the public remarks, I'm not 100%.
You just can't tie the concession to the commission. You can't make it a requirement. They made that very clear.
But a general statement, that seller's agreeable to a 3% credit.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's currently okay. We don't know where it's going, but it's okay.
When you check the box for seller will allow concession, they're putting an automatic line that goes in the public remarks that says seller is open to offering a concession.
Yeah.
Carol, you had a question?
My question is it still steering, if I call Tina and say, Tina, I wanna bring a buyer to your listing, is your seller willing and open to cooperating, and paying me as a buyer agent? She says no, and I tell my buyer, you know, they're not open to it, and I know you're a first-time home buyer, you can't afford to pay me. That indeed is steering also, because
It's
am I not
because the
taking
buyer's
them?
making the decision.
Okay,
You're telling the buyer, hey, you have an agreement with me with a buyer brokerage agreement, and I'm letting you know that the seller is not offered, or we're not gonna be able to negotiate commission
right,
at this point in time.
right,
Do you still wanna see this property?
right. And
They
if
say
they
no.
do, they have to go on their own.
Well, no, you have an agreement with them, you can
Okay.
still take them and try to negotiate something.
Right.
At that point. But then if the seller truly isn't going to offer any compensation, well, you still have that buyer brokerage agreement, you go back to the buyer and say, you know, maybe this home isn't for you, because you still owe me this
You're gonna have to pay me.
compensation.
Exactly, yeah,
And, you know, it's the same way if Michael pre-approved them for $500,000 and said, they're only pre-approved if they can get 3% closing costs out.
Right.
And you're not able to negotiate that, you know, the seller says, no, I'm only giving 1%.
yeah.
Can't come to terms, they gotta move on.
The problem lies with, all of this information getting to the general public before it came to us. So we are having to backpedal and make this known how it really was meant to be explained, and
Exactly.
not by the media. And so now they're like, do I believe you or do I believe NBC? Like, come on, I mean, so then I'm having to go in and re-explain it again.
And that's been NAR's stance on, you know, every realtor wants NAR to get this big campaign out and tell exactly how things are supposed to go forward. But NAR's come out and said, you know, we want that put on our realtors. Our realtors, they're the community leaders. They're the people who are involved at the community level. They need to be the ones that are advocating for it, you know, to tell their buyer and seller exactly what the true settlement was and what it's all about.
Yeah, just hard to go back.
Oh, of course, 100%.
So guys, hold tight. I see time's getting away from us. We're gonna get all your questions answered, but I want to turn it over to Michael because last time I had him, I didn't get a chance to let him talk about his contract. Let's get some information on the current contract and what we have. We'll get all the questions right.
I think that, on the contract, well, I think the biggest thing that I wanted to point out was page 3. For those that haven't been. So the main thing would be is on line 139, 140, line 154. If you haven't seen anybody burned by those other requirements, you've got to pay attention to see if there's anything listed on those for other, any additional terms that might be written in there. Obviously, the best place to write additional terms about compensation to the buyer's agent is under additional terms at the end of the contract. But you certainly want to pay attention that this would be a prime place that if you have, I wouldn't surprise me if there's somebody in this room that's been burned by somebody maybe on those other lines, and you got to make sure you pay attention to that. The other thing is in my opinion, the easiest place to address compensation for the buyer's broker is right on the contract itself. Okay, that it just simply states seller agrees to pay buyer's broker 3% of the purchase price, that kind of thing. But understand, you're not a party to the contract. So while that's the easiest place to do it, at the moment, you're not a party to the contract, the broker's not a party to the contract. And just like anything in the contract, the buyer and seller can agree to remove provisions in the contract, which is including compensation to you as the broker or as the agent. So the compensation form seller to buyer's broker is definitely the ideal method. But I'm not saying you're not going to see it in any variety. You may see it on the contract. You may also see it by separate form. The separate form is better in terms of that it can't be removed because the agents and the broker are a party to that actual agreement. So you should be prepared to use either one. Amir, you had some suggested language like seller agrees to pay broker blank % of the purchase price. I think that's fine and it can be right under the contract, but you run the risk that it could be removed. The other thing too is that what happens if there's a buyer works with multiple brokers and doesn't tell the other broker that they're involved in the transaction. When you have it in a sales contract, you're not a party to that contract and you don't have recovery of attorney's fees and costs if you end up having to sue your buyer for your commission. Nobody wants to sue a buyer, trust me. I'm not thinking that that's what we're doing, but we're just trying to keep the buyers honest too. Okay, and if they try to be dishonest, we want to try to turn their head and keep them in line. You guys have any comments about those? Do you have a preference?
No, I
Send
mean,
that.
nobody does want to sue a buyer, that's fine. You don't want to get involved in that area, but that is why you have the contract there. If you, I have seen this scenario playing out in my head, is that I enter into a buyer's agreement, everything gets negotiated out of the contract, and I'm sitting here going, where did I get in the deal? How come I'm not getting paid? That might be your option.
Yeah, and that's why that buyer broker agreement and that separate compensation are so important. That the parties themselves can't work you out of a deal.
Yeah.
You know,
So should we do both?
well, you're gonna have to, so the buyer broker agreement, okay, is between the buyer and the broker saying, I agree to pay this compensation. In the buyer broker agreement, it says, if this amount is offset by the amount you receive from the seller or the seller's broker. So you would have the buyer broker agreement, that's your obligation that the buyer agrees to pay you. And then you have the seller to buyer broker agreement in which you're receiving that compensation from the seller directly. So if I were presenting an offer and I wanted to get 3% from the seller, you could put it under the additional terms. That's one place to put it. But you can also be sending, you know, the buyer broker agreement saying that you agree to compensate me this amount of money. Now, what happens if the seller never signs that commission agreement to do it? No problem, because your buyer themselves agree to pay you that compensation. You could certainly say under additional terms, offers contingent upon seller accepting sellers to buyer broker commission arrangement. But you want to make sure that you tie them together. If they don't accept one, you can fall back to the original buyer broker agreement.
Okay, question for you, Mike. Have you ever seen a buyer's broker agreement judicially enforced? I'm not talking before closing, but in the state of Florida where it's actually gone in front of a judge and a judgment was rendered between a agent and an actual
I
buyer?
didn't know the form existed until a couple of months ago. I mean, I knew a form like it existed. We never had to use these things. So no, I don't have any experience of
I've only
litigating.
asked because I checked with a couple of attorney buddies, 2 or 3 different none of them can find any case law of it ever actually going through litigation. I was just
We didn't
curious
have
how
to
it
use it.
No, but I can tell you what does stand up is a listing agreement, isn't it? Just the
Yeah.
opposite of a listing agreement with the buyer?
Yeah.
It's a slam dunk to enforce a listing agreement, by the way.
Yeah,
You could put a lien on a property with a listing.
Well, I'll let the attorneys answer that.
you can on residential and commercial, you can. But, I mean, I'm sure we're gonna see a lot more lawsuits over the, you know, the buyer broker agreement because you didn't have to have it before. If you're a member of the board, the MLS required that you got paid as part of the MLS
Right.
rules, and that was the whole simplicity of the whole process was if you wanted to play in this, you know, in this pool, you agree to these terms, and the MLS patrols it to make sure everybody lives up to their end of the deal. That was what was nice, was it got rid of all of these separate agreement pieces of the pie. Now it's gonna be more onus on you to make sure you have those agreements signed.
They're gonna have to pay to enforce them. And no broker is gonna wanna sue a buyer, and an agent isn't gonna wanna
Well,
sue a buyer.
If you can, if it's in the agreement that you recover attorney's fees and costs. No agent wants to have to sue a seller over a listing agreement. But if you get screwed, you're gonna sue your seller. But think about all the times that you don't have to sue the seller. It's because you have a signed agreement with them and they say that that they agree to these obligations. It's not gonna be any different. It's just gonna be a different return of how the facts are. We're gonna say to the buyer, look, you've agreed to compensate me. You can't just cross me out of the contract. I have an agreement with you that you're gonna pay me even if you tried to cross me out of the contract. Oh, okay.
And Michael, correct me here if I'm wrong, in our last meeting, you were talking about the line 140 and 154, and sir, you can't close the deal if we're referenced in there, correct? The deal won't close.
Well, you can still close it, but if you okay, so we can pay vendor invoices and stuff like that. I would like eventually to say, so that if we're aware of a contract that we have to pay, it's not in there yet, okay?
Okay.
That if, it would be nice to say that that we have to pay a commission if there's an agreement entered into. It's not there at the moment,
Okay.
okay? We can certainly pay an obligation of a buyer to pay something at closing, but it's not in there. Once these forms hopefully are modified to say that we have to pay a commission, it'll be harder remember, we just facilitate what's in the contract. Right now, there's no provision that obligates us to pay a buyer's broker's commission that I'm aware of, that I don't recall seeing it. My point is that eventually it'll be nice where we have to pay it, and it takes more effort for a buyer and seller to actually remove those provisions from the contract.
So I'm on the lending side. I do the mortgages. I see everybody's financials, and these first-time home buyers, they do not have money. So they're coming back to me as of late saying, okay, so I'm freaking out because the agent's asking me to sign this legal document that I'll pay. And you could see fully that I cannot pay. So, I mean, part of me is like, I go speak to an attorney. They don't have attorneys, these first-time home buyers, you know? So they're being told, and I want to make sure I'm standing behind my realtors, like they're going to do everything to get this covered. It's just kind of new minutia that we have to get through. But then at the same time, if it doesn't happen and now it goes too fast and they end up in a house and they've signed something that they're gonna do 3%, I mean, they could come back to me and said, you said.
Okay, but now think of the flip side. I understand that, but if we let those buyers wiggle out of those not signing agreement or back to the zero situation, and they say, well, won't you agree to just keep that zero you originally set to? Because I can get this house now as long as I don't have to pay you my commission.
Right.
That's the risk you take. If you're foolish enough to do it, then you took that risk as an agent for the buyer. I don't think you should do that. What you need to say is, I'm gonna get the 3% from the seller, and if we can't get the seller to agree, we're gonna go find a property that we can't find.
Can't afford this property.
Yeah, you can't, that property's not gonna be the
That
one for
property's
it.
not
Because if we said zero, then we run that same risk of that buyer saying, oh, well, please, I really want this one and I don't have the money, and you said it, and then they say, well, look, you said you'd accept zero. I did say I'd accept zero, you know, so you don't wanna do that either.
It's sad though that it runs a risk of somebody not getting a property they want because they don't cooperate, and then it's our guilty conscience.
Especially in this environment.
Yeah,
But
it's
you know,
really
on the
sad.
flip side, does it really happen that much? I don't know that I think we're all worried about something that's probably not gonna be so influential as we think it's gonna be. That sellers are gonna prepare to compensate buyers agents. Buyers are gonna say, I'm willing to pay the compensation. We just need to look for a property that has it. If the new norm is gonna continue to work the same way as the old norm, it's just a mechanic of how we're
It
playing
is, and I
transit.
try to do a good job of explaining it, but
And back to the listing agent conversation with sellers. We could do a whole class, Amir and I, on that conversation. My listing presentation wouldn't be different than it ever was the previous 30 years until I got to the point about compensation. And I would say, listen, last month, this is what I would have talked to you about. I would have talked to you about the total commission or the full commission as I'm hearing out there. But today I'm only talking about what you're going to pay me. Last month, in the last 3 decades or whatever, we would have talked about what you were going to offer a buyer's agent. But now I'm going to prepare you that offers are going to come in with you financing that commission for them. So that's what they're doing, right? But I think you really need to have that conversation, and I think you need to be intentional about it. And I also think you need to tell the sellers that you want a qualified agent on the other side of this transaction to make sure this deal closes, A, closes, B, closes on time, somebody that understands escrow deposits, inspections, appraisals, all the hurdles that we navigate to get through there. So I think if we're doing a good job and our listing agents are having good quality conversations, I think that, like Michael just said, this is just kind of semantics and it's going to be okay. Now, we're going to do it here. Make sure you're telling all your colleagues out there with other companies to do the same thing as well.
I would even have the exact same. It's gonna, was 6% before, it's 6% now.
Yeah.
But it's gonna be done a little differently. The mechanics of it are gonna be, I charge 3%. And we're gonna advertise that you're offering to pay the buyer's agent, you seller offering to pay the buyer's agent 3%. And so it's the same 6%. Before it was, I collected the 6 and I gave half of it away. Now it's just gonna be different. You're gonna pay the 3% directly to the buyer's agent. So same mechanics, except on the closing statement, we all know it used to be one charge to the seller. We broke it apart, but it's actually.
It's still gonna look the same.
It's gonna still look
It's
exactly.
still gonna look the same. It's still gonna look on the settlement statement.
If we do it that way, it's gonna look the same. If, however, could potentially just for you all to know how it's gonna look on a settlement statement, it's gonna either look the same way, where seller pays the buyer's broker, the seller pays the listing broker. Or it's gonna be the seller paying the buyer's broker 3%, the seller giving a credit to buyer for 3%, and the buyer being charged by the buyer's broker 3%. So money goes from seller to buyer. That's the worst way to do it, but you may see it that way too. So I just want to prepare you for any of those variables.
So we were talking, or you were discussing about the different places that you should be checking to put in like the compensation for the buyer. Is it possible or a wise idea to put like the compensation disclosure statement down towards the end with the agenda and additional items and have it as one of the other items? I mean, it does still run the risk of being negotiated out, but it's
So, sorry, well,
technically just
explain to me
become a
what,
policy.
what,
So,
you just wanna add
yeah,
this one
so
step?
take this because that does cover both the buyer, the seller,
Put it
the
in
owner,
other-
and you put it down here.
Yeah,
This is
for,
just to bring your old stuff into compliance.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Moving forward, it's going to have that disclosure on there. It was one of the settlement agreement
Yeah,
main terms.
Or is there another document that you could then put there so that it becomes part of the contract?
So you're saying in section 19,
Right.
where you check the boxes, they have that other box.
Mhm.
And then you put other and compensation agreement, seller to buyer.
Right.
Essentially.
I mean, is
Yeah,
that
yeah,
something
bring
that
it
you could
Into
do?
the contract.
yes.
So, and then it becomes part of the contract,
Right? So you send the contract with
yeah,
that,
that everything is
yeah,
there.
along, with your condo writers or your PUD writers or anything like that.
Seller's property
Yes,
disclosure.
all
As
of
long as your buyer is okay with it.
Right, exactly.
But hold on, let me remember, understand,
Mhm.
this agreement and the buyer broker agreement are two separate
Right.
forms. You could try to tie them together like that, but it's just like a counter offers, the other side
It can
could
be
remove
negotiated
it
out.
too, so pay attention to that.
Yeah.
What you could, the easier mechanic would be is to say, contract is contingent upon seller's acceptance of the buyer broker agreement. That way, they know they can't accept one without the other.
So is that,
You
should
got
we
it,
just
Bernardo.
add that to every additional term?
Well, it depends on,
Yes.
it depends on how you're presenting your offer. Some agents are gonna say, you can just write on the contract itself, seller to pay buyer's broker Charles Rutenberg Realty 3%. That's entirely acceptable in 99.5% of all contracts, because in reality, the buyers and sellers aren't gonna remove the additional terms, and they're not gonna sue each other over it. But I'm telling you, if you were that small percentage and they say, Mike, they removed the commission from the contract, you're not a party to it. That's why the buyer broker agreement is probably better in protecting the broker from getting to collect that commission. See, if you write under additional terms, seller agrees to pay buyer's broker 3% of the 3% for real estate commission, that's fine. We as a title company will do it, but the broker is not a party to this agreement. Hence why the buyer broker agreement is a better arrangement. Because then it's an agreement between the broker, buyer's broker, and the seller directly. So if I were the seller, if I were the buyer or the seller, I would have that buyer broker agreement ready to rock and roll with my offers, and then I would tie the two together. With some sort of statement that this is contingent upon the seller acceptance of buyer's commission of 3%.
Bernardo?
On additional terms, wouldn't it be wise to just say a seller to compensate buyer's broker X amount as per compensation agreement attached? And then have a seller's compensation agreement attached to the offer.
That's fine.
And then if you want to disclose how much your agreement with the buyer is, that's a whole different subject. Like, that would be the easiest way to enforce both ways.
That would be fine too, yes.
Sure. So in the same context of everything we're talking about buyer side, what about if you're handling both sides? If the seller just finds the buyer, how are they gonna do that?
Are they gonna
The
do
listing
what?
agent has the seller already, but then they find the buyer has no realtor.
Michael's covered
So
that.
I
We did
covered
that
that,
earlier.
we covered that earlier. That was, your listing agreement should say, to recap that statement.
Hold on, where is it?
So you're telling this, you meet with the seller and you say to the seller, we're gonna do 6% commission. And I'm gonna charge 3%, I'm gonna offer 3% to the buyer's agent. On a standard listing agreement, that's covered under provision 8A for what I'm charging and 10B for what I'm offering to the buyer's agent, okay? 3%, 3%. But under additional terms, you're gonna write, if the listing agent procures buyer, the buyer is unrepresented, listing agent's total commission is to be blank. And now I've covered a situation where it's an unrepresented buyer and I'm handling both sides. Now I'm gonna be charging a higher fee.
And you don't want it written in the last page of the contract also.
Doesn't need to be.
Okay.
You can, doesn't hurt,
You already have a contract.
You already have a contract that
Right.
says that.
It's a contract, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
It's never, look, anytime you can help drive home the facts, it's never a problem. So like when, I know,
Right.
when we typically would say on the FAR bar as is, to not write in your commissions on page 13, cooperating broker or listing broker, sometimes you see the agents write that in. That's a great place because guess what? The seller signs seeing what everybody's making.
Seller to buyer's broker. That would protect the buyer's broker, the buyer's agent. As far as the listing part goes, that's in our listing agreement. We just said that earlier, that us as listing agents, we are protected for our commissions based on that. So we
Yes.
don't need to have the buyer broker agreement in there, because now that's actually for both parties, which I get that, but I think the compensation is the better one. And I just did one yesterday. So I have it in line 140 and on the additional terms, plus I also put the other compensation. So it's all three areas. And then I was wondering, which we were talking earlier, is if we happen to have a buyer who is going to pay the buyer's agent, okay, because the seller won't, and they happen to have money, would that then go under line 154 along with that compensation agreement?
I think so.
Okay.
Well, hold on, you shouldn't need to do it, you can. But if you have a buyer broker agreement, you shouldn't need to have it on the contract because you have a separate agreement that covers it.
Okay, I didn't even need that, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's already an agreement range
And that's
between the buyer.
enforceable,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
contract?
as long as it's filled in and has the right compensation on it, yes.
That's a question over here.
Yeah, I'm gonna go forward, I guess we'd say, to this person's question online about if we're the listing agent and we put in your verbiage about being paid for helping the buyer, at the point, let's say theoretically, we're at an open house, someone walks in, they're from out of state, they don't have buyer's representation, and they say, oh, I would love to work with you, we're representing the seller, do we then at that time enter into a buyer broker non-representation agreement with that buyer? And then how do we make sure that we're not in violation of like dual agency?
Yeah.
I'm not a broker, so I gotta let the broker.
Okay, I mean, I think I'm asking the question correctly, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
If a buyer comes into your open house, right, and they say they wanna make an offer on this property. So you can do one of two things. You can do a buyer brokerage agreement with them, or you could just do the no brokerage relationship disclosure
okay.
prior to revenue.
So then are we just a transaction agent to both then? Is that?
You would be if you didn't sign that no rep agreement. You're in the state of Florida, you're presumed to be a transaction broker absent any other notification.
Okay.
If you enter into an agreement with them, it will have an agency disclosure relationship in there once you enter into the buyer agreement. I think we get a lot of questions on this. If you show a property, obviously you have to have a buyer's agreement. If you begin working with is the term. Well, we're making a stand that just doing some emails on properties, you got them on a drip campaign, you don't have to have a buyer's agreement for that, but you begin working with, hey, I want to see this property. Do you have a lender? That's working with, that's when you have to enter into the buyer's broker.
Yeah, I guess I was meaning more in light of, if I'm understanding everything correctly, like in my mind, like we go to the listing agreement, we discuss the commission, the split of the commission is in 8A is what's paid to the listing agent, and then the 10B is what would be paid to the buyer's agent. But then you suggest in the additional terms to write that if listing agent procures buyer. So I'm saying at the point we procure the buyer, let's say, and in my theory, we're at some listing, someone comes from out of state and they're like, oh yeah, I would love to buy this. Can you represent me? And then at that point, we then enter into a buyer's broker agreement with that person. And then because we have this verbiage in additional terms, the seller then is already aware of the fact that we would be in essence working both ends, but we're then not in violation of like dual agency.
We don't do dual agency, that's transaction broker in the state of Florida.
Okay, all right, okay, that makes sense, all right.
Yeah, so you're good.
How does that look with like negotiations and like inspections and all that type of stuff? Like, or do you see this as like not a very like realistic?
I don't see that as a big deal. I operated as a transaction broker my whole career. I never entered into single agency or anything other, and I work both sides of the transaction at all. That won't change from new business. This won't change that. I would probably have them sign some kind of touring agreement at the very least to make you compliant. So you're running an open house, you're representing the seller, you can open that on the seller's behalf for anybody, you don't have to have agreement. Somebody comes in, they begin working with you, right? They want to buy this house. You've got your compensation covered because Michael just gave you the language for that. Hey, I got to work with this person too. There's a lot of paperwork, a lot of responsibilities I have to do. So you're getting more now because you wrote it in additional terms. That covers the listing side of it. On the buyer side, I would just have them sign some agreement. I would probably pick the touring agreement because I'm not looking for compensation from them at that point. I'm already getting it for my seller. I'm not answering this right on your point. Please make sure that's
Yeah, no, you're answering perfectly. I was just.
But you still, to be compliant with the new settlement stuff, enter into some kind of agreement with them, the buyer at that point. Just, you don't have to charge them anything, just let them know that you're signing the pre-touring agreement or whatever, some kind of agreement. Okay, showing agreement, you know, as we talked, you got the touring agreement, the showing agreement, and the EBBA, just get something signed with them.
Just a side note to that, if you're not able to put the deal together, and you really want a true buyer's agreement with them, so that if you show them other properties, you're protected.
Okay. Yeah, all right. Yeah.
And you were saying something about being conflicting on inspections and
Inspections.
stuff like that. You just gotta treat both sides fairly and neither get favoritism.
Yeah, that was one of my
So you
questions,
just have
because at
to-
the MLS thing the other day, they talked about this and they brought up the dual agency thing and they're like, if you have questions about this, answer your broker, because everyone's been doing their.
Well, because you could have single agents. who-
So, okay, yeah.
But we're all
I'm
transaction.
newer, so I'm just trying to understand, like.
So we're all, Charles Ryder Realty are transaction brokers, which, you know, we have, you know, use care and diligence, account for all funds, limited confidentiality.
Right.
So, you know, with those, that's where George was saying, you know, you treat them both very, very fair, you know, both of them very similar. So, you know, that's where Michael was saying, you know, when you get into situations, a lot of times you're just taking one email that you receive from the seller and you're forwarding it over to the buyer and vice versa. Well,
Okay.
slow it down, read it first before you send it on over.
I remember that.
So we have a question in the back. That's gonna have to be our last question too. We're gonna have to wrap it up.
So when we're the listing agent and buyer's agents are calling us about compensation, is Charles Rutenberg wanting us to lean either or, just basically telling them like, hey, we're offering this amount? Or hey, the seller is willing to offer an amount?
So you guys are gonna get tired of this saying. Had a conversation with my seller. My seller's interested in that price. They're open to anything. Put it in your offer.
Okay.
Let's just say that. They're open to any and all requests. Put it in your offer.
So if we go that way in the listing agreement under 10, do we have to put a certain amount of compensation to the buyer?
You don't have to, no. I mean, just because we have a listing agreement, let's say we have a listing agreement that only has 8 right? I'm getting 3%. That's all I know. That's all I care about. I hate to say that, but now when an offer comes in, your seller can accept anything in that contract. I would prepare them. That's what you have the conversation. Prepare them. Hey, offers are probably going to come in with, compensation to a buyer's agent. You have anything to add to that?
No, I mean, exactly what Mike said, you know, the seller's open to any and all, requests put in your offer. I do think that if the seller, was adamant and said, yes, in part, 10B, I want to offer compensation to a buyer and I want to offer it, or to a buyer's agent, and I want that to be 2.5%, that when you receive that call, you need to tell them exactly what the seller wanted to offer.
Yeah, if there's a specific amount in there and they have authorized you, we have an obligation at that point, a responsibility to tell the other side. There's been some scenarios. All right, so guys, Byron, Tina, you guys want to wrap this up?
I guess we have, so just a reminder, the next class here, Tuesday, September 10th. Byron, Wednesday, correct, 11 o'clock on Wednesday morning, we have a forms workshop at the office. It is not offered by Zoom because it's an actual workshop. So Byron and Amir, Amir, you're in it. You're in it to win it. So Byron and Amir, you're in it to win it, buddy. So Byron and Amir will be handling that workshop. So sign up, weekly broker update, that's Wednesday.
Wednesdays, every Wednesday, it's 10 a.m. We have a weekly broker update. We'll do Q&As on there. We'll do whatever. It's a great place for you guys to jump in and ask some questions. Things we can involve it. It's great to stay tuned in. All right, so that pretty much wraps us up for this week.
Michael Cocker, you got anything?
Michael, guys, I just want to reiterate one last time. My whole career early on, way before my rep work days, I used an attorney to close my transactions because they had a title company there, and he was also a good friend of mine. I also had an attorney to close my transactions. To close them, you understand? When things pop up, in a transaction at the last hour, if you have an attorney-owned title company doing it, they can provide some tremendous value and problem-solving skills that just a normal title company isn't going to. Please give these guys a shot at your business. Please give Michael a shot at your business and Bernard. This is the only time you ever hear a pitch from me, they come here out of the goodness of their heart to pour everything out. Michael could certainly be running some billable hours somewhere right now. On something. So thanks, guys. We'll see you all there.